Welcome to the Lita Citroen Podcast, your space to grow your influence and elevate your personal brand. In each episode, you'll hear inspiring stories, expert insights, and practical strategies to help you stand out, lift up others, and leave your mark on your team, your community, or the world. If you're ready to make your voice heard, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
Well, hello and welcome to the Lita Citroen Podcast. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you learn something, feel inspired, and are encouraged to continue to listen. If you've been with us before, welcome back. I'm really happy you're with us again. Today's going to be a very special program, and I'm going to tell you why in a second. Think about the people that you know, your neighbors, your colleagues, your friends, people you see in the grocery store, people you see on the train or on airplanes. Odds are you know people who have served in the United States military. You do because there are 17 million veterans living among us. These are our neighbors, our friends of friends, our colleagues, and the people that we see in the store. There are 8 million veterans, people who have served in the United States military in today's workforce. And today's program is launching on Veterans Day in the United States, Veterans Day 2025. It's a day that means a lot to me because I didn't know about the military community prior to November 9, 2009, when I became aware that there were gaps in the transition, that there were skills and conversations that military veterans weren't receiving as part of their transition. And I saw a way that I could help. And if you have 12 minutes, watch my TEDx. It's on YouTube. It's really good. And it talks about my journey in coming into this conversation as a civilian with no personal connection. So whereas you may have known someone of those 17 million, I didn't. I didn't have a neighbor or a friend of a friend or a colleague who had served in the military. And I had a lot to learn. And a lot of employers today are still struggling with that. What we're going to talk about today is from the employer side and from the veteran side, because we know that transitioning from a military career into a private sector or civilian career is really difficult. And 60% of today's veterans in the workforce qualify as underemployed. They are not employed at the level of their skills and talents and experience. And we're going to talk about some reasons that happen, but also some ways to move through that. There are a lot of challenges in the market. We know that the job market today is crazy beyond crazy. And not only are civilians competing against civilians and veterans competing against veterans in the market, but you have civilians competing against veterans and different skill sets, different character traits, different desires and dreams about their future. And that's really confusing for a lot of employers. We also know, based on some research that we uncovered, that 2/3 of hiring professionals today would say that they are still uncomfortable and uncertain when interviewing someone who has a military background. Is it intimidation? Is it an overzealous, respect that I don't want to say something stupid? Or is it just unknowing? That's a good question. But there is a gap between those coming out of the military and those trying to hire them. And we want to tackle that because unemployment is one problem. Underemployment is another. So I want to bring up two incredible people in my life and professionally and personally who are going to join me for today's conversation. First is Tricia Kim. Tricia is the Transition Assistance Program Manager at the United States Air Force Academy, where she supports service members and their families in navigating career transitions. With over 20 years of Air Force experience, Tricia is also a proud military spouse. Prior to her current role, she spent 11 years as an active duty Air aerospace medical technician. That's a mouthful. Gaining expertise across multiple medical specialties and serving as an instructor and clinical lead. I have known Tricia for, oh my gosh, what is it?
10 years.
10 years. And yes, every month that I go down and I teach in the transition program at the Air Force Academy, Tricia's there. So yay. Welcome, Tricia.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Perfect. And Kevin Preston, boy, Kevin and I go back, I want to say like 15 years. That's scary. It makes me feel old. Kevin is a retired U.S. Army colonel with 28 years of distinguished military service in the United States Army, serving numerous global assignments. Today, he leads the veteran program for one of the nation's largest media companies, where he oversees veteran-related activities across multiple business units and focuses on employment, philanthropy, volunteerism, learning, and development for our veteran community. Welcome, Kevin.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks so much. Every time I think about how long I've known you, Kevin, it just makes me tired. Like I feel old because I start using numbers that I remember when people would say, "Oh, I knew that person for 20 years," and it's like, gosh, how old do you have to be to know someone for 20 years? Like my age. So yay. Well, let's kick off the conversation because what I framed up in the intro is underemployment is a big problem. And then there's this idea that is underemployment driven because we're underselling ourselves. Is the veteran, the active duty service member going through TAP, going through interviews, going through all that process, are they underselling their values? Are they able to reframe their military story into a way that a civilian employer would understand? Are they spending enough time really understanding what it takes to find a successful post-military career? I will put a side note that I encourage our listeners, if you are prior military, to watch my LinkedIn Learning course, which is translating your military skills, because that's one way to avoid underselling yourself. But Tricia, as someone who's helped thousands of service members through transition programs, what are some of the most common communication gaps that you see veterans bringing as they try to communicate their value into the civilian world?
Exactly what you said. The number one reason is that translation of military to civilian skills. Because we do things that are so different, sometimes we don't know how to tell the employer the value that will add to them. So that translation, all the leadership training, all the different experiences we have, the deployments, all the things, we understand how to talk to each other, but sometimes we just don't understand to put that into meaning for an employer. What is that going to do for them? All of that experience we bring to the table. That's probably the number one thing I see in transition, the underselling, just not knowing how to show that value to that employer for what you've done and put it into terms that they'll understand. So sometimes it's like speaking a foreign language to each other.
Is it a new issue or is it a problem or challenge that's been there? As long as
it's always long as I've been working in the space, and of course transitioning myself, that has been a challenge. And we do focus a lot on that. As you said, you have your LinkedIn Learning. We talk a lot about that in TAP, but it's just different when you're the person trying to put your whole life and career on paper and get someone to understand, when most of us have spent, years talking to each other. So we know how to communicate with each other, another military person. But thinking about someone who may have no idea what we've done, where our views come from, just because of the things we've seen and done.
That's a really good point. And Kevin, from your perspective on the employer side, are there any tips or advice that you have for veterans on better translating their skills to meet the needs of that hiring manager?
Sure. So I've spoken to hundreds of veterans about this process.
Mm-hmm.
And as was just said, there's many elements coming into play in this equation. There's the employer piece, there's the veteran piece, and we're trying to get these two parties to merge together and have a conversation whereby each can understand each other. And as I've said, each has a role in this scenario. It's not all on one or the other. But, general advice that I offer to veterans, and my caveat before this is what I'm saying does not apply to every person that leaves the military. In my experience, it applies to the majority, but there are some that just leave the military and seamlessly integrate into a company. Um, and you almost wouldn't know they're a military person in a good way. But what I'm saying, in my experience, applies to most individuals leaving the military, and it's a product of the immersive culture from which you came. And in my opinion, there's no culture that is more immersive than service in the military. And you can qualify that by saying, name me another job or career whereby you associate with one group, live with one group, shop with one group, receive your health care with one group, perhaps worship with one group. Now, you're probably going to get off base, but if you choose to, you can be entirely insular with this community and really not be exposed to the outside world. That shapes who you are. The values of military service shape who you are. They are words that are largely similar across all branches, words that drive behavior and drive your decision making, in my opinion, while you serve and throughout your life. So putting all those things together, the notation was given of the number of veterans in this country. About 93% of our country has not touched military service, which means 7% have some degree of military service. Of the 93%, you can almost guarantee that what they know of military service comes from watching the news or watching content from Hollywood. That's their exposure to it, and that's natural. I wouldn't expect it to be anything else. But that's their impression, and that gives a snippet of what it is, but it's not the entire picture. So that's their interpretation of what the military is. When we know it's far deeper and far more complex, than those two little pieces. On the military service side, if I had to give just a couple of pieces of quick advice, I could say nothing else. I would say, one, realize that who you are speaking to when you're seeking employment has never touched military service in their entire life. You may stumble upon the recruiter that has military service, which is outstanding, but in all probability, the person has never touched military service.
Right.
Therefore, the implication for you is the language you spoke for 4, 6, 8, 20, 30, 40 years, you pretty much have to dismiss your own language. Or at least if you speak in military terms, you have to qualify it very quickly. Because one who never touched military service will have no idea the words you are saying if you speak in military language. Just like if I spoke to a person in the Air Force, I would ask them to probably define some things they're saying because each branch has their own language. The second piece I'd offer is speak in a way they can understand, speak in words they can understand. Also, too, advice that was given to me many, many years ago is have things on your resume that we being ones who are doing the recruiting, can recognize. What is that? Those are certifications. Those are degree titles. Those are all things that anybody can recognize, regardless of military service. And that made all the sense to me in the world. So you can get human resource certifications from SHRM. You can get PMP certifications, whatever degrees you have, or advanced degrees. Those are all things that make perfect sense and level you out with others that are applying for roles that are not of military service. So I talked a lot. I'll pause here.
No, that's fabulous. And, you make me think of something that I sometimes will offer is, if somebody was like a mechanic in the Navy and they want to go into project management, to your point, like on the surface, that resume is not going to make sense. So sort of not demilitarizing it, but putting those keywords in there, getting some of those, even those little certificates that they do on LinkedIn, right? It's not a PMP certification, but it shows a potential employer that this isn't just a fluke, that you're actually trying to get into project management. Kevin, you had talked about something in a conversation we had about just the difference in terminology, right? Managing a P&L in the private sector versus handling procurement in the military. Can you talk a little bit about the nuance of the different terms?
Sure. It's very common, and once again, very understandable. So when I say these things, I'm not pointing a finger saying you did something wrong. It is as logical as it gets from where a person comes from. I've seen many resumes that will equate levels of rank to business titles. Perfect. That's a way to display what you have done in a word or words that a person will understand.
Right.
And words like CEO are used, COO are used, things of that nature. Which probably in scope of responsibilities, if you count the number of people, that's reasonable. The one thing I would just offer to any service member is if you're going to use those titles, remember that those individuals in the corporate world have a profit and loss statement attached to them. They are chartered to control cost and make a profit. And if it's a public company, return value to the shareholder. Now, you may have done that. Often base commanders have experience with dealing with finite resources. Do I keep this open? Do I close this down? Is there a better vendor for this? So you can talk about things that are profit or loss or dealing with finite resources. But just keep that in mind if you're going to use those titles, that when you use that, the instant assumption is, oh, this person has managed a P&L and has experience doing that, and I can bring them to my business and they will have competency in the past of doing that.
That makes sense. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to work with an executive coach? I've had the honor of working with professionals, entrepreneurs, and executives in over 38 countries, helping them navigate the career process through the lens of personal branding and reputation management. The tools that I use allows us to co-create a strategy that puts you in the best position for control and influence over your career and your target community. If you're interested in learning more about personal branding, let's talk. Tricia, in counseling all the airmen and, well, service members too, because I know that we pulled from other bases as well. Are there practical exercises that you're often working with these active duty service members to kind of pull them out of that reluctance to oversell themselves, right? And that's why underselling is the right term, right? Because not only, as Kevin has pointed out, are we talking about a language difference, it's a culture difference.
Yes.
So what are some exercises that they might do to get more comfortable with that?
The best thing they can do, our favorite word in TAP, is networking, which we all know. Get out there and talk to people, especially if you're interested in a certain career. Say if you wanted to do something like Kevin does, talk with Kevin, have him take a look at your resume, talk to him, have him give you advice. There's a lot of people out there that are willing to help. Find out what your gaps may be early. So that is exactly some of the examples I use in TAP is a for-profit. Most of us in the military have not been responsible for the bottom line of the Air Force. We'll kind of make a joke out of that in TAP. Have you ever been the one flipping the sign saying, come see the Air Force? Most of us haven't. We are responsible for budgets, but not for showing a profit. So how do you bridge a gap like that? Doing research early, if you know that that's a gap. Just for an example, there's ways: volunteer, talk to people that do that job. I had someone who sat on the board of a nonprofit for several years before he transitioned and decided to, be in charge of their fundraising. He was able to show an employer, no, I've never been in charge of a for-profit, but I can show you how I know how to generate revenue. So that's some of the best things that you can do. What are you interested in? Do your research. Talk to someone. There are so many people willing to do informational interviews to help veterans. If you're willing to reach out, LinkedIn is an amazing tool for that. Look at those people, ask them, can I pick your brain? Do you see any gaps? Are there any ways that I could rectify that? Whether that's training, certifications, or just maybe doing some shadowing to get some of that experience. So I feel like that's one of the best ways to help yourself. Just like when you joined the military, you didn't know everything day one when you showed up to your training. It took time to get integrated. Hopefully you did a little research about the service branch you were joining. It's the same thing. They're not going to expect you to come in and be in charge of the company day one. You're going to have to learn about the company, just like you learned about your role in the military. So that means different things for different people.
Yeah. And, as you're talking, I'm thinking about, being scared or intimidated or, uncertain when you're 18 or 19 years old and you're going into the military, which you're right. Hopefully you did some research. That has to feel really different, though, when you're 40 and you've got a family and you have a career behind you. And now, we're saying, well, just go do all this, the same research again. And it's like, well, wait a minute, the stakes are a little different, right? That has to feel really different, and then there's the employer side. And Kevin, you're absolutely right. I always say it's not about, the veterans are doing it right and the companies have to do something different, or the companies are doing it right and the veterans have to adapt. It's about two different cultures, two different entities coming together to figure each other out, right? So it's not a good, bad, right, wrong, but there are ways that employers can do things like ask better questions, spend a few more seconds looking at a resume that might indicate military background. If it's overly military and you don't understand it, find someone on the hiring team who might have a military background or have experience who can kind of decode that. Kevin, what are some other things that employers can do? I know you've built best-in-class veteran hiring and development programs. What are some other things employers can do to bring more of that community towards them and make it easier for them to be found?
Yeah, so there's quite a bit. And the good thing is there's a lot happening right now. I mean, we're sitting in a place today in America where there are many, many, many companies that are well versed in the hiring of veterans and military spouses, and many nonprofits that are out there to help both parties along this journey. But on the corporate side, a few things I would offer is take the time, and this can be from external, this can be from internal, but take the time to have someone come in and present to your hiring, your talent acquisition, and your hiring leaders a course on the military culture. And help them. It helps them define and see what this institution is. It's the institution of, a Department of War, previously Department of Defense. It has 6 branches, and I include the Coast Guard in there, even though they're part of Homeland Security. Each branch has a distinct mission, and you may think, holy smokes, this sounds like a large corporation. Each business segment has a distinct mission, and they all come together in a complementary fashion, to go under one mission, just like the Armed Forces does in joint operations. But you start drawing parallels between what the armed forces look like and things they can understand in the corporate world. You take time to teach about the military culture and why we as veterans may behave the way we do. Why do we stand the way we do? Why do we talk the way we do? Why are we, often so serious? Why is our conversation blunt? And if you give explanation to those things, people's like, oh, okay, I get it. And if you don't give explanation, a person may conclude, Kevin is just not right for this company. He is, insert too serious, too stern, too rigid, you can put a lot of twos in there. So explain those elements, and that will often help people in this journey. Second thing I would offer is, I would put forth that a resume is a tough document to do, period, regardless of your time and experience in doing it. But doing a resume for the first time that matters is really tough. And the comparison that I use is, for those employers out there, think of something you did for the first time in your life. It may be juggling, it may be tying your shoe, it may be riding a bike, it may be speaking a foreign language. So the first time you did it where it mattered, how well did you do it? And most people will say, I didn't do it particularly well. Well, I would transfer that logic right back to the resume. This is the first time that one who serves is doing a resume that matters. And the first time you do something is going to be rough. So give a little bit of latitude on the resume. They are trying, but once again, it's a tough document to do. And add to that now I'm telling you to write a document that's probably not in the language that you speak fluently, i.e. your military experience, and put it into a business language that you're not fluent in. So a lot of these elements come together to make it tough. One statement I would say is just give those who serve a beat when they're applying for roles. I think average resume screening time is about 25, 27, 28 seconds. Well, maybe you take a minute on the resume screening. Maybe you give them a little bit longer to answer questions in the interview process and accept there may be some pauses in their thought and logic because they're trying to frame a correct answer to your question after interpreting what you're saying into their own language.
I love that. As you were talking, I was remembering a few years ago, I had a chance because I do a lot of the training that you're talking about, not from a military standpoint, but as a civilian who sort of figured out or cracked the code on the military. And I was asked to come in, very, very large New York based entity. And I trained up it was talent acquisition and recruiters, very different group, but we did both sections of the organization in one meeting. And they asked me to, talk about, the hiring process, the interview process, onboarding, reading a resume. I mean, it was like in 3 hours, fit that all in. And so I had the PowerPoint and I was going through everything you talked about, right? What the different branches do, some of the, not assumptions you can make, but there's some mindset patterns that lead people into certain directions. And I did all that training, and there wasn't a lot of engagement, which was surprising because they had a big need, until I said, so what questions are coming up for you? What are you feeling and thinking as I'm sharing all this? And then it's like the floodgates opened, right? There were so many like emotional concerns, fears about, to your point, Kevin, what they'd seen in movies. And I was shocked of a company this size, an organization this size, they didn't have any prior military in their talent acquisition or recruiting team. So they were all kind of going, is this true? And it became a game of true and false. Is this true? Is that true? All these assumptions and theories and, urban legends that I was shocked. So that's still out there. As much as I think you're right, companies have figured out there is a character that you get when you hire somebody out of the military, almost regardless of the job that they did, right? There's qualities and character traits, but there's still so much that veteran doesn't know, and there is so much that employer doesn't know. And just making it safe to say, I hope this doesn't come across as a dumb question, but can you explain this part of your resume to me? 'Cause I don't know what that means. It's kind of creating more of a safe dialogue might go a long way.
Lita, if I can add quickly an example from the opposite direction.
Sure.
And the opposite direction is taking a seasoned business person, let's put them in the business for 15, 17, 18 years, and dropping them in the military. And all of a sudden, we just drop you into this environment. So for employers out there, there's a way to do that. There's a program called Employer Support for Guard and Reserve, ESGR. And they do a program called Boss Lift. And what it does is it exposes those in the business world to what the guardsmen and reservists do. You're seeing what the military does. You're getting a taste of it for a day. So I coordinated this. Colleague went to this program, was dropped in, got picked up in a Black Hawk, flown to a military base. Now you're in the military world, you're not in the corporate world. They had civilian clothes on. They're in an environment now where everybody is in uniform. Everybody's carrying a weapon. Everybody's fully kitted out. And all of a sudden, you are not the person that knows everything. You're the person that is brand new to an experience. And they loved it. Absolutely loved everything that happened. At the end of it, I asked, I said, how did it go? And it was A, I learned so much. B, I didn't know anything. I couldn't even open an MRE to eat my own food. I didn't know how that worked. I couldn't heat the food in the MRE. I didn't know how that worked. The most basic things they had no experience in. Yeah. So I mentioned that because that's what the veteran feels like when they're coming to you applying for a job.
Yeah.
Something they know intimately well, and they're dropped into a world that's brand new.
That's excellent. Tricia, I can tell you're loving that example.
Oh yeah, he's spot on. I wish every employer could do that. What a difference that would make.
Well, and we know that when companies stand up a veteran recruiting initiative or a veteran resource group, whatever they decide to commit to, that if it comes from the top, if it comes from that C level and goes down, it's got a much higher likelihood of being sustained. But we also need those frontline talent acquisition HR folks to understand this too, because that experience that you painted a picture of, Kevin, I mean, for the CEO and the president of a company to get those, and I've been involved in ESGR for years. You're absolutely right. Fabulous organization. But it has to translate to their front lines who are actually doing the interviewing and are going to make that commitment to take a minute instead of 28 seconds to look at a resume. To that point, Tricia, I've got a question for you. We talk a lot about networking and surrounding yourself with a support system for the veteran. Do you think there's a benefit for employers, those hiring professionals, to kind of create a support system of peers and, people like Kevin, people like me who have I have a little bit compared to Kevin experience in this space, to help them level up and understand what this transition really looks like for that incoming candidate?
Absolutely. That would make a huge difference. Like Kevin was saying, it's like being put into a new environment. Same for the employer. This may be completely new to them, dealing with someone who served and understanding, just like Kevin said, why they may speak or why their mannerisms. When I talk to those veterans that are kind of shocked with their first employment experience post-military, a lot of times it's the fit. They just didn't know where they fit, the culture, integrating themselves in. So if an employer has a chance to understand a little bit more about that and have that support to talk to other, hiring managers and others about stuff like that, that would make a huge difference. Just like veterans, we get a lot of support. That would make a lot of sense if they're going to work with us to also have that support.
Yeah.
Hey, I've experienced this scenario. Have you ever dealt with that before? How did you help this person? I mean, that would be huge.
And there have been, great initiatives, the 100,000 Jobs initiatives, all these big companies coming together. Let's go back to the idea of underemployment, though. Kevin, where does that come from? Why are our military friends choosing positions that aren't at their level?
Well, I think, like many things, it comes from a number of items. I mean, I can think of 6 without thinking real hard of things that contribute to this. The first thing is that the military is very simple as far as leveling across all branches, E1 through E9, O1 through O10. The rank goes across, you know exactly what it's very, very simple. So a person grows up with that, and then you put them in a situation where it is not simple. It's not wholly different between companies, but titles don't have to be the same across different corporations. And I'm asking a person to move from, here's what I did in the military, I know what I did, but what does this mean over here on the corporate side? How do I move from this to that? And quite often, it's really just kind of throwing a dart at the wall, hoping you hit something correctly. I mean, I've seen and I advise veterans leveling to apply for, but I said, don't apply for a C-suite role, an executive role, a managerial role, and a role as coordinator all at the same time. They are wildly, wildly different and different levels of experience. You need to, focus in on the level that's appropriate for you. But once again, you need guidance to help do that. You're probably not going to hit it on your own the first time, not really knowing the corporate structure. So that's one piece right there. The second piece is being able to equate, and this is on the business side, being able to equate what a person did in the military to their business sector, going back to 93% have never touched military service. If you came from Procter & Gamble to Xerox, or Xerox to Walmart, or Target to Walmart, you can hang a level on yourself and a job title, and they will instantly recognize what you did, probably with 85 to 90% accuracy. Now, you do that coming out of the armed forces and put your military rank on there. That doesn't mean a whole lot to them because they don't know what you do. So quite often, the hiring side is making their best attempt to get you in the right position and level you properly. But if you're applying for a job that's kind of, under what you're doing because you don't know, that's probably going to be the job they're going to put you in. Now add to that the element of humility. And I think by and large, the armed forces, it is full of humble people. And we don't talk about ourselves. We talk about the team. We talk about anybody but ourselves in the process. And that's just the character trait, which is laudable. But once again, don't let humility drive you to the point that you're not telling your story and representing your brand on what you did. There's a lot of fascinating things in the military, and I'll close this out.
Yeah.
Go back to 93% have never touched what you've done. All they know of what you've done is news and movies. Now you are standing before them, big as life, with an experience they can only imagine. So take time. Don't water down your experiences in the military. Tell it in a way they can understand the story, but tell them of all your great experiences while serving, because you're telling them things they can only imagine, based on what somebody does in the media.
Yeah. You talk about confusing job titles. I remember I was mentoring, I think it was a soldier, and he said, he goes, I've heard the best one I've ever heard. He goes, there's a job title called a chief happiness officer. And I'm looking at him like, yeah. And he goes, no, seriously. And I think, yeah. He couldn't even believe that was somebody's job title. And I love how you talk about, the humility and sort of being humble. Tricia, but there's also this belief that sometimes you have to, especially if you're making a big change in skills or in work, to step backwards a little bit to go forward faster. Talk
Right.
a little bit about that, and what are you seeing with folks coming out of the military today? Are they looking at that approach, that it's not underemployment as a long-term strategy or just giving up and settling? It's part of a career plan.
That's exactly right, especially because I would say the majority of people I work with, they are looking to do something different. So they realize that they may have to start a couple levels down, but we encourage them, hey, but you're going to move fast. That's what we always see. Sometimes the employer just needs you to come in and learn about the company, knowing that you are someone they see value in. And unlike the military, where we know there's a very structured way that we would move up, it's not always like that. You can move up a little bit faster even than we can move up in the military. Sometimes it's just about them getting you in, kind of seeing where you fit, giving you a chance to learn their culture and kind of move from there, especially if you are completely career switching, which over 55% of service members leaving the military are going to career switch because they are looking at doing something different. So figuring out where their skills align, but also knowing sort of where their gaps are. We talk a lot about gaps, your gap analysis. What are the things you bring to the table, but what are some of the gaps you may have? And sometimes it's for that reason they may end up feeling like they're a little underemployed, but we assure them sometimes it's just about getting your foot in the door. Trends show over time, and I'm sure both of you have seen this and can speak to that they're going to move a lot quicker than most of their civilian counterparts will, as far as, getting promotions and things like that. It's just they need to learn the new culture and see where they fit. Most of the time, that's it.
And you talk about the gap analysis. That's something really hard to do by yourself. Like,
Mhm.
have somebody with you, like a Tricia or a Kevin, someone who
Yes.
can say, okay, you might see that as a gap, but it's not really a gap in the work that you would be doing going forward.
Right.
Because we can find fault in everything, of our own. So having somebody alongside of you. So what we've talked about thus far is that veterans really need to clarify how their skills translate, right?
Mhm.
It's not enough to list your MOS or your AFSC, which are the codes that that the military assigns to jobs, but then also, where do you add value? I always say, your resume is a look backwards. And that's why I'm not a huge fan of resumes, but it does tell a story about how you got here. And where you add value is the story of what comes next. We want them to feel that sense of service that empowered them and motivated people like yourselves to raise your hand and serve your nation, because we don't have a draft in this country. So our military is purely voluntary. And that means that, Tricia and Kevin and all of the Tricias and Kevins out there, you volunteered for people like me as a civilian who benefits from your service and sacrifice. So in closing, Kevin, I'll start with you. What is one message you would like to give either to the corporate hiring world or to those men and women coming out of the military? What's one message you would want to give them?
I said this last week when speaking to a group that's currently serving about transition. And I said to them, you serve today on the best team in what you do. There is nobody better, the United States Armed Forces, at what they do in the entire world, period. You're on a Super Bowl team. So realize you're on a Super Bowl team and present and market yourself that way. It's not just a ho-hum job. It's not just something you go in and walk in to do at 9 o'clock and leave at 5 o'clock. You are defending the nation. You are defending a 250-year experiment that redefined how nations work. And you've taken an oath to defend the Constitution, and you are exceptionally good at doing that. And a great deal of what you do and know and say transfers directly over to employers. You just don't know it yet. So for the one serving, I would say that. For the one hiring, look at the pool of those who serve as the tops in the nation. Getting in the military is not a simple task. I had experience in recruiting for a long period of time. The number of people that would go to be admitted and the number of people we got, the ratios were vastly different. So getting in the military is not a simple thing to do. There's a cognitive component. There's a physical component. There is a purity of legal violations component. And then staying in this organization for a number of years and continuing to serve with all that it asks you is, once again, not an easy thing to do. You are getting top talent. And this organization produces roughly 250,000 people every year that come out. They're looking for employment, education, or entrepreneurship, one of the three. And it doesn't stop. Roughly 250,000 people every year. Maybe it's 240, maybe it's 260 the next year. Right. But look at this pool of talent as consistent, educated, available, and they will accelerate what any company does by their values and by their experience.
Love that. Tricia, what is your message for veterans or service members who are listening or those who are seeking to hire them?
I would say for the veterans and service members, know your why. You obviously have a service, a heart to serve. And a lot of times people get into situations where they feel like they're unhappy in their first job because they're like, where do I fit? What am I doing? Knowing their value. So that is one of the biggest things we love to focus on in transition. It's not just about finding, a job. It's about looking at the culture, being happy. How does it fit you and your family now? Because sometimes what they have a hard time wrapping their head around is they get to choose now. No one's going to tell them where to go, where to move. And for some service members, that's actually very stressful. Others, that's so exciting for them. But you get the choice now. So do your due diligence, start early, do your research. Does that company fit you? It's just as important to interview a company as it is for them to interview you, because most service members leave their first position just because they just don't feel like they fit there. And for employers to just understand that understanding where they fit, the mission, the value, because that's what we do every day, the service before self. If you can help them to understand where they fit in a culture like that, you're probably going to hold on to them a little bit longer.
I love that. I love that. You remind me of a project I did for a very large financial organization that has a lot of call centers, and they hire a lot of military. There was very high turnover, to your point, right?
Mm-hmm.
These folks were leaving and not usually giving an explanation, just not showing up. It was usually someone who'd come out of the military within 12 to 18 months, and the company couldn't figure out why. What they weren't doing was connecting it to mission. They weren't sharing with those employees what it meant to be on that phone with someone who was struggling. And once they connected it to mission and they really started unpacking the values and the brand of the organization, retention went way up. Mm-hmm. So I know that the three of us could talk for hours on this topic. I want to honor the fact that you've given up so much time today, and thank you for that. I want to thank anyone who is listening, who has served in our great nation and worn our nation's cloth. Thank you for your service, because I'm thanking you for my freedom and my family's freedom. And it is a calling that I leaned into November 9, 2009, and I've never looked back. It has been just an absolute blessing and gift in my life to be able to use my talents to help transitioning service members build their personal brand, build their value, and answer the question of why. Employers, yes, listen to what our guest said. This is a workforce that is ready to go. They're trainable, they're adaptable, they're resilient, they have character traits you cannot teach people. And if that sounds like somebody you want to hire for the long term, this is the workforce. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Tricia. Such a joy to see you both on screen, but also to have you participate in the Lead a Citroen podcast. I know that we've got another great program coming up next time, so be sure to subscribe. If you liked this conversation, share it with a friend, share it with your company. Maybe they can do a little bit more to bring in prior military into your organization. And until I see you next time, I wish you all health, happiness, and all good things.
Thanks for tuning in to the Lead a Citroen podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow the show and leave a review. It helps more people discover these inspiring conversations. For more tools, insights, and resources, visit Leda360.com or connect with Leda on LinkedIn. Until next time, remember, your influence has the power to make a real difference.